Jaron Jarvis Channel, Top 20 Scary Stories of the Day from Reddit nosleep. 2018-08-29. Story 1, One night someone watched me through a painting on the wall, now I know why. Have you ever woken up in the middle of the night and got the feeling that you are being watched? When I was a boy I traveled with my parents to visit family quite often, and we always used to stop overnight at this hotel on the way. One time when visiting family aged about 8, the hotel we normally stayed at was all booked up, so instead we stayed at a place called the Stag Inn. There were no family rooms available, so I got a single next to my parents' room. The Stag Inn, like most inns, was just your average old English pub with a few rooms to stay in. It was friendly, cozy and quite old-fashioned. The evening we spent in the inn was perfectly normal, but the night I spent there traumatized me as a child. The room I stayed in had a painting on the wall opposite from the bed. It was a Georgian painting of a serious-looking man wearing a waistcoat and a cravat. There was nothing special about the painting, and I lost interest in it only seconds after I noticed it. Once I had finished my meal in the bar I went to bed. I drifted off to sleep quickly and I abruptly woke up later. I'm not sure what time it was. Something felt off. The moon illuminated through the window, lighting up the room slightly, and I sat up and stared at the wall for a while until my eyes locked with the eyes of the painting, except they weren't painted. The moon gave enough light for me see. The eyes didn't match with the rest of the painting. They were so lifelike. I kept contact with the eyes, terrified and confused, and eventually I started to think that it was just my imagination. Until they blinked. I threw the duvet over me and buried my head in the pillows, almost crying. I fell asleep not long after. The next morning I was awoke by my parents for breakfast. I told them what happened the night before, and they told me that it was just my imagination. When I went back to my room to pack and leave, I built up enough courage to inspect the painting. There were no real human eyes peering through and no eye holes left behind. The painting was perfectly intact. Despite all this, I was sure that what I saw that night was real, and it scared me shitless. For a while I had these horrific nightmares about my experience. I became paranoid and checked my room every night before I went to bed, and I was terrified of paintings, but then at some point as a teenager, I forgot. Fast forward several years, I had just finished university and was back at home. One evening, while eating dinner with my parents, the Stag Inn was brought up in conversation. This reminded me of my experience there, except now it didn't scare me, it intrigued me. I found the location of the inn and booked the same room as before for one night. It was time to know the truth. I drove up and arrived at the inn. I checked in and was handed the keys to the room. The room hadn't changed at all, with the painting still hanging in the same place as before, and again there was nothing wrong with it. I hadn't given up though. I searched for a passageway in the wall and then I noticed the cupboard. It was only a couple of feet away from the painting. I'd never thought about it before, but it just seemed odd in that place. There was so much more space in the room, so why would they put it there? I looked into the cupboard. It was completely empty, no shelves or coat hangers. I pushed on the back of the cupboard with a feeling of dread creeping over me. It opened. I walked into a dimly lit box room. It was completely empty. All there was a gap in the wall and the back of the painting covering it. I removed the back of the frame carefully and slid out the painting, which revealed another painting, except it had two holes cut out where the eyes were. The frame was at my height and my eyes matched with the holes. It was as if I was meant to look through it. I peered through. It was night on the other side. The moonlight was gleaming through the window. I observed the room until my eyes locked with the eyes of a little boy sitting up on the bed staring back at me in terror. It was me. We kept eye contact for a good few seconds. Then I blinked. My 8-year-old self hid under the covers and I kept watching, bewildered, trying to process what I was seeing. Then I noticed something. There was a man hiding under the bed. Trembling in fear as he stared back up at me. I widened my eyes at him and he crawled out from under the bed and ran out the room. I slid the painting back into the frame and entered into the room. It was daytime again. The owner came to check the room out. Apparently he never knew the room existed. We looked through the painting again and found ourselves staring back into present day. So much makes sense to me now that didn't before, but I still have so many questions which will most probably be left unanswered. How could I see into the past, and most of all, who was the man hiding under the bed? Story 2, I met a mermaid when I was 9. I met a mermaid when I was 9 years old. Well, met is the wrong word to use. I saw a mermaid when I was 9. We never spoke, but she was my friend. Sometimes she would wave to me when I was out on the water, other times she would just stick her head out of the water and smile. I didn't have many friends at 9, your usual situation, a quiet girl with a mousy appearance that would rather read a book than have makeover sleepovers. However, my quality of life didn't suffer because of this. If anything, in my mind at the time, my life was far better than those of my peers. I got to live the lives of the characters I loved most whenever I opened a book, so why would I care about a stupid sleepover when I could step into a mysterious castle in England with a mere flip of a page? Admittedly, I did get a little too caught up from time to time with my ranting and raving about magical worlds and creatures that slipped from the pages to my reality, so it was no surprise to me when my mother rolled her eyes after I told her that I had seen a mermaid. She rolled her eyes and shook her head, sending a quick shot of cold through me, a feeling that came with knowing she was rejecting my idea, leaving me embarrassed and with a need to prove what I was saying was true. Come on, Mom, please. I saw it, I know I did. That's what you said about the dragon you saw fly over our house on Tuesday. She was right, I had made that up. I thought I had seen a dragon but quickly realized it was a cloud, but that didn't stop me from immediately telling my mom all about it. Today was different though. Today we were at Grandma's house by the beach. There was something about that place that enhanced my imagination, maybe because we were right on the water and the air always smelled of things I had never smelt before. Earlier that day I had gone out on our boat with my grandma for a few hours. We were about 30 minutes west of the dock when I saw her. She was exactly how I pictured mermaids, blonde, smooth skin, smiling, bright blue eyes. She bobbed up and down in the water, grinning at me, her arm raising up in a quick wave. I remember my heart stopping and having to make an effort to hold in yelps of glee so I didn't scare my grandmother. By the time I could tell my mom, I was ready to burst, so it was extra disappointing when she shot me down like she did. I didn't bother pushing it with my mom anymore that night, so I decided to turn around and go to bed, knowing I would just have to show her the mermaid in the morning. Sure enough, the next day, she was there. I looked over the front of the boat and squealed when I saw her peering out at us from behind the same rocks she had been near the day before. I darted to the back and grabbed my mom, yelling nonsense about how she was wrong and I was going to be right for once. In the 5 seconds it took for me to get her to the front of the boat, the mermaid had disappeared. My face fell, I looked up at my mother, the beginnings of disbelief on my tongue. But before I could say anything she just smiled and shook her head, and walked back to the far end of the boat. I didn't understand, she had been there a second ago, so where was she now? I was determined to see her again. I sought her out for 4 more days, until finally I was ready to give up. It was my last day at the beach and I was ready to decide that I had made her up in my head. When my grandma offered up one last boat ride before I went home, I agreed, not thinking I would see the mermaid, but just to be on the water one last time. So you can imagine my surprise when I saw her, just as I had seen her the other 2 times, floating idly by the rocks. She looked a little different this time. Her hair looked whiter than before, and her eyes had become completely blue from end to end. Her smile seemed weighed down, the skin around it looked grey, but it could have just been a trick of the light on the water. She raised her arm a bit in a half-hearted wave. I did the same, smiling knowing I had been right all along. Over time I forgot about my mermaid friend, until last night. I had spent all day moving into my new apartment, and I crashed pretty early and woke up pretty late. When I woke up, I remembered a dream I had had about a blonde mermaid. She was screaming about how she was stuck under a rock, and she sobbed and sobbed into the water that she was scared and tired, waving one arm out of the water hoping anyone would see her. She looked familiar, so it didn't take long for me to remember the mermaid I had seen when I was young. I'm writing this now because I got lunch with my grandma today. She told me that earlier that week they had found bones in the lagoon outside her house, partially under the big rocks out west. I don't think I ever met a mermaid. Story 3, there's something wrong with the David Bowie song Life on Mars. To be completely honest, I really don't know very much about this. Up until the event that forced me to write this, I thought the thing people were experiencing was just a cool effect that Bowie must have implemented. I pray to God that I'm mostly right. A while ago, I saw on Reddit that someone had listened to the song Life on Mars overnight, and when they woke up the next morning and listened to it, it sounded odd and distorted. I thought it was a bit odd, but I had heard that this same thing could happen with other songs and that this effect was related to the REM state of sleep. Then another user had commented that the exact same thing had happened to him/her with the exact same song, Life on Mars. Nothing to worry about, just a wacky coincidence, right? Then my friend got interested in it. I'm pretty sure to this day that he saw the post too, because when I went to tell him he already knew exactly what I was talking about. His name was Ethan, and he was 19. After some conversation on the subject, Ethan seemed excited to try it because he thought it would be like manipulating his brain. I didn't really care, and while I'm a fan of David Bowie, being unable to enjoy only one of his songs seems tolerable. He was to come over to my house in the afternoon in 2 days, and he seemed so ecstatic that I was worried he would listen to the song overnight without me. 2 days passed, and I spent the better part of the morning staring at the ceiling of my room. I knew what we were going to do was harmless, yet something in the pit of my stomach told me something was going to go horribly wrong. I should have listened to my gut. Maybe if I did, he'd still be here. Afternoon came. We sat around drinking and having a good time until Ethan started demanding that we start listening to the song. At that exact moment, I felt the most horrible sensation in my very bones. I can't describe it. It was like being told that I would die in 5 minutes and turning to see a huge red timer on the wall counting down, slowly but surely. I've done some stupid things at college, but this seemed almost like I was making a mistake I would regret for the rest of my life. Being the idiot I am, instead of doing anything to prevent him from doing something I could feel was definitely wrong, I just nodded my head and he put the song on repeat using the living room speaker. I remember feeling how cold the room was, like starting the song also simultaneously put the air conditioning on freezing temperature. I just thought Ethan had put the air conditioning on low when I went to get more beer from the fridge. I remember thinking in that moment that David Bowie was a chronic user of drugs, and maybe he put some weird feature in the song. Sometimes I think of what I would have done if I knew how wrong I was. The alcohol soon caught up to us, and he stared at me, said something along the lines of time for bed, and soon fell into a deep slumber, which I thought was odd because he was a really light sleeper and took a while to fall asleep. A few minutes after Ethan went under, I could feel like my brain had just undergone the stress of a 100-hour work week. I had barely enough sense to realize that this was not natural. Panic quickly flashed through my mind. I hadn't drank nearly enough beer to feel this tired. What had Ethan and I just gotten ourselves into? I knew I had to get out of the living room, so I quickly sprinted up the stairs. Once upstairs, I felt about as tired as I knew I should have been. My body went cold as ice when I realized whatever wanted Ethan and I to sleep had gotten Ethan. I remember tears rushing down my face as my mildly intoxicated mind considered the fact that I could lose my best friend to some evil spirit-like presence. If my drunken mind wasn't actually conjuring up the correct situation I had just gotten myself into with my friend, we would all laugh about it the next day. But the next day, I could tell Ethan was and never would be the same. He looked tired and pale, which didn't make sense because he just had 11 hours of deep sleep over breakfast. All he said was something about listening to the song. He trudged to the living room with me in tow, and put on Life on Mars. He stared at me with a stupid smile and said, "It sounds weird." I knew that either something possessed my friend, or he experienced something that changed him forever. I wasn't able to see how it changed him, because 1 hour after he left my place, he stabbed himself in the heart with a knife. His parents weren't home, and the police went to me. It was easy to prove I didn't kill him, because my house's security cameras backed my story, but the footage on that living room camera reminds me every day how I lost my friend to our own stupidity. I can't really explain what the footage was, because I can't explain it to myself. The only thing is, the second we put on the song, the camera shows a black mass surrounding both of us. Once Ethan went under, the black mass slowly seeped into his body and completely enveloped him. The black mass starting moving in on me, but I dashed up the stairs and the mass quickly disappeared. I don't know what it means. My parents love the house, so they won't sell it because of my ghost stories. Take this warning. Don't listen to the song Life on Mars more than once in a row, and for the love of God, whatever you do, don't fall asleep while listening to it. Story 4, My Dad Slept with a Ghost. My dad and I have always had a love for scary stories and movies. After we watched Gremlins, he told me he saw them in the alley one night while he was out patrolling. This is just one way he would try to freak me out when I was a kid. As I grew up, I began asking him if he believed in ghosts and the supernatural. To my surprise, he actually said yes. Afterward he told me a story that I have never forgotten, and it still gives me chills to this day. Now, my dad is a sharpshooter. He can joke around all he wants, but when he's serious, you can tell. He will look at you intently and sit on the edge of his seat and lean forward like he's telling you a secret. He doesn't smile or crack a joke. This is the truth and nothing but the truth. He starts out, "Have I ever told you the story of when I saw a ghost?" By that simple question I was hooked. I shook my head no and looked at him with both horror and curiosity. This is what he had to say. I was in high school and my friend Ian asked me to spend the night. I told him I would ask my parents when I got home and come over when I could. I was pretty excited that he asked, since I've never been to his house before. None of our friends have actually. I asked my parents right when I got home and they agreed, so I grabbed my bike and headed over. As I made my way to his house I could feel a shift in the air. The road went from open and sun shining down on me to trees overflowing from both sides and a cool breeze whispering against the back of my neck. I didn't think too much into since I could see his house in the distance, and damn was it impressive. I had to pass through a black iron gate before I could go up the driveway to the two-story building. I walk up to the stairs and I'm in awe of the wraparound porch with seating built into the side of the house and wind chimes swinging together making an odd but nice melody. I heard Ian out back with his dog Molly, so I followed the porch to the back where I could see a pool and a lake with a dock attached. I went up to Ian and told him how mind-blowing his house was, and he smiled at me like he was a little embarrassed. I decided to play it off since I didn't want him to feel weird that he hadn't invited any of us over in so long. We passed the day by throwing the football around and playing with Molly. Eventually we made our way inside for dinner. It was in the middle of our meal that his mom spoke up. "Michael, you remember Sarah, don't you?" Sarah was Ian's big sister who went off to college last year. Ian knew I always had a little bit of a crush on her, and it wasn't cool that he seemed to have told his mother about it too. But I guess it wasn't cool of me to be crushing on my friend's sister either. I just replied with, "Yes, Mom. Well, she comes back tomorrow and we were planning on having a lake day if you would like to join us." "That would be great." I looked at Ian and he just smiled and rolled his eyes. What did you expect? I was a 17-year-old boy. How could I say no to something like that? After dinner we just went upstairs and watched some movies in his room. Before long I could hear Ian snoring and I knew it was only the beginning. I've left my own room to sleep on the couch whenever he would spend the night at my house. I went downstairs to get a glass of water before I went to sleep and I could see his mom sitting in the living room reading a book. She asked, "Is he snoring up there?" "Yeah." "Do you have any earplugs by chance?" "No. But you can spend the night in Sarah's room if you like. She won't be home until later in the morning and I'm sure she wouldn't mind." "That would be awesome, thank you." I go back upstairs and go into Sarah's room. I felt weird just being in there, but I told myself it was because I had a crush on her and I didn't want to feel like I was snooping. I walked right to her bed and got under the covers. I eventually fell asleep, barely hearing Ian snoring in the room next door. In the middle of the night I woke up to the feeling of someone laying next to me. I'm so confused and still a little bit asleep when I open my eyes and see someone looking right back at me. Not just someone, it was a girl. I'm so tired that I just smiled at her and she smiled back. I turned over in the bed and went right back to sleep. I woke up the next morning and find myself thinking about last night. I vaguely remember someone coming into the room during the night and laying next to me. My first thought was that it was Sarah. I mean, who else could it have been? She must have come home early and just gotten in bed with me instead of kicking me out to go back into Ian's room. I go down for breakfast since I could smell pancakes and bacon cooking. I sat next to Ian at the breakfast bar and said, "So Sarah came in late last night." Ian turned his head to look at me and I could see confusion on his face. His mom looked up from the pan of bacon and asked, "What do you mean?" "Well, she came home last night. I woke up and she was laying next to me in the bed." "Have you not seen her yet?" Ian and his mom looked at each other. He turned to me and said, "She called like an hour ago saying she was on her way home." I just looked at them as I asked, "Then who came into my room last night?" His mom answered and said, "I'm sorry, I should have had Ian say something to you before you came over." "What do you mean?" "Ever since we bought this house a couple years ago we've had strange sightings around the property." Ian saw them first. I look at Ian and he had that same smile on his face from yesterday, like he was embarrassed about something. He said, "I was outside with Molly one day and I saw this man on the dock. I went to go see who it was but by the time I got down there he was gone. A couple weeks later I saw him again but he was with a girl this time. She saw me and she smiled. I went to go get Mom since she didn't believe me last time but by the time we came back outside they were gone." His mom looked at me and said, "I didn't believe Ian until I saw her with my own eyes. It was later in the evening and I was walking around the porch to sit down and drink some tea while I read my book but when I came around the corner I saw someone sitting in my chair. It was this girl who had the same blonde hair as Sarah but before I could call out to her she was gone." I look at them in shock and I have no idea what to say. What can you say when you just spent the night with a dead girl and you just declared it so casually? I'm just starting to get some words together when his mom said, "But even after all we've seen, they've never been in the house before." Story 5, please just help me figure out who Rachel is. I really didn't mean for this to get so long. I'm sorry. When I was a kid, I had an imaginary friend named Rachel. She first showed up when I was about 8 years old. We didn't play together or really interact at all. She'd just show up at night, and curl up in bed behind me, and play with my hair or drape her arm around me while I fell asleep. She was the same age as me, and she looked very similar to me, only she had brown hair, and I'm blonde. She didn't even start speaking to me until I was about 12 years old. She was just there. And it was nice, she was just this comforting presence. I wasn't seriously physically or sexually abused as a child. I didn't experience anything that would lead me to having an imaginary friend outside the normal ages for this kind of thing. But she never left. And once she started talking, it was always sweet, reassuring things. Like, if I got in a fight with my mother or one of my friends, she'd whisper to me at night about how pretty I was. She usually just used the word pretty. Nothing else. Still just touching my hair. Between the time she started speaking until today, I've had 4 true interactions with her where she wasn't just a presence, but something I could actually see in front of me like any other person. The first time I could physically feel her move my body was also the first time I saw the other thing like her. It was early in the morning on a weekend during a break from school. I think I was maybe 13. My bedroom floor was tile, seriously, it was tile, and I started hearing this wet, smacking, sloshing sound over the left edge of my bed, kind of like someone walking in soggy shoes. I had a basement bedroom and I had huge exposed pipes in my ceiling and sometimes they'd leak. I sat up, leaned over the edge of my bed, and I saw this thing. I mean, it was clearly a human. But it was blistered and rotten and bloated, and the torso was purple and green and black with bruises, like a body that hit the water and sunk. It was dragging itself up toward the head of my bed by its elbows. The legs were just being dragged behind it, it couldn't use them. I couldn't see its face, just clumps of wet hair. I'm not a fight or flight, I'm a freeze. I've never been terrified in my life like I was that morning. I couldn't scream or move, and Rachel curled her arm around my torso and pulled me into her chest, and we laid there like that for a long time, until I couldn't hear the wet slapping noises anymore. I'd never seen Rachel look angry, or really even make any facial expression before that day. I saw that thing just like I can see my roommate sitting on the other couch right now. I wasn't on anything, I wasn't sleeping. I know what I saw. I didn't see that thing again for another 9 years. Rachel grew up while I grew up, only she shot past me. I hit 5 feet 5 inches in 6th grade and stopped getting taller. By my senior year of college, Rachel was over 6 feet 5 inches and absolutely gaunt. Her eyelids were so translucent I didn't know how she slept. Her hair was a really dark brown, then. I'd started dating, kind of, one of my childhood friends, Luke. He was fucked up, I didn't really know it then. Maybe bipolar. He had a bad childhood, it wasn't really his fault that he was like that. Anyway, I'd never seen Rachel so at ease with anyone except me. Our relationship was primarily based around some very violent sex. I wasn't even the sex so much as the violence. My first broken bones were from him, my first split lip. I guess I don't want to say too much about that. Why I was with Luke doesn't have anything to do with this story. I just mention it because Luke was the first person aside from me who Rachel loved, and I loved that she loved him. It was almost like this little happy family. Rachel, she kept getting taller after I moved away from home for grad school, 4 states away. By then I was 22. Still had an imaginary friend I didn't tell anyone about because it didn't occur to me to. I just kind of figured I was crazy. I don't know why I didn't question any of this. Around the same time, I started to get smaller too. I was depressed when I moved. I didn't know anyone, didn't have any friends. Started working out more and eating less. When I finally did make friends, they got me into drugs, and I ended up on meth for a couple years. It seemed like a good way to lose weight, to get happy again, and to stay up until 4 a.m. writing papers. While I was using, Rachel showed up more often. I'd blame it on the meth, but I'd been seeing her my whole life at this point. For the first time, she wasn't confined to my bedroom. She came everywhere, but she didn't talk to me outside of my apartment. She just stood in the corner and watched while I got high, and she started making the strangest noises, like, in her throat. Whenever I'd finally go home to crash in my own bed, she'd coil her entire body and her hair around me while I slept and sort of compliment me all night, pretty girl or baby girl or perfect. Usually just little words like that. Never whole sentences. Her hair was too long and almost black, now. Her shoulders had gotten broader while her hips got more narrow. Her fingers were longer too. For a long time, Rachel was the only thing I could trust. It felt like she was keeping me safe. That's what I got from her, security. Other people around me were getting hurt. The girl who I'd started using with, she was raped by one of our dealers and killed herself. I was sick. My hair was falling out and I never slept. There were always maggots in the sink from food I'd forgotten about and never eaten. A combination of things led me to stop using, but Rachel was the only thing I had in the interim. My friends were all dying, hated me, or I hadn't spoken to them in years. But she loved me intensely. I had to drop out of grad school to get clean. A lot of people helped me get clean. Rachel stopped leaving the apartment and she stopped sleeping next to me. Instead she just stood by the head of my bed like a 7-foot-tall hulking black Kotrak. She looked so stony and shadowed. She wouldn't even acknowledge me. It was awful, like I was being punished. The second time I could physically feel her, like anyone else, was this night I was Skyping with a friend from back home. My friend, Holly, she'd grown up very strictly Catholic, just like me. She was getting her master's in counseling and she'd just always been very perceptive. We were just joking and chatting until Holly stopped talking and just stared into the camera, very thin-lipped, and she flatly said, "What is that?" I thought she was talking about new kitten Nugget. "What is that thing?" "Where?" I asked. "That thing by your fucking bed." "What the fuck is that?" The only thing by my fucking bed was Rachel, standing in the corner. I didn't have any photos on the wall. She was the only thing there. Holly and I both stayed quiet for a minute. Until I finally, very hesitantly, spoke. "You mean Rachel?" I could tell Holly was looking directly at my face, and she very softly and sternly said, "Is that what you call that thing?" I shut off the computer. I could see it reflected in the black screen. Holly was right. It wasn't Rachel anymore. It was standing behind me, like always, just playing with my hair. I could literally feel my hair moving. I wasn't afraid. I was in shock, I think. And now I don't know if there ever was a Rachel. I think it was just pretending the entire time. Now when I see it, I don't see a girl anymore. It's this thing. I started calling it the coiling instead, because that's what it does. I don't know what else to call it. I know it's not human and it's not a ghost because it's not dead and I don't think it was ever alive. By the time I learned I shouldn't have named it, it was too late. It's still here. It still lives with me. It leaves the house with me sometimes, now, but not very often. 2 other people have seen it since Holly. I'm not crazy, I swear. I've seen the thing crawling on the floor again since then too, but she wasn't what I thought she was either. I don't know if that matters anymore. It's beyond saving, I can't help her. And I don't think anybody will believe me, so I don't bother telling anyone any of this. I'm a 29-year-old woman, for fuck's sake. I want to know where this thing came from, if anybody has had any similar experiences. Please tell me if you have a thing like this. I cannot be the only one. I'm not interested in getting rid of the coiling. I've tried getting rid of it and someone got hurt, and at this point, I just prefer to keep it. I just wanted to give people enough information to help me figure out what this thing is. I just want to know what's in my bed every night. Please help me. Story 6, my dad keeps going back to the woods. Last month and almost 10 years later, my dad finally upgraded his 2007 Motorola Razr for an iPhone 7. He is a 55-year-old simple man. When he got his new iPhone, I helped him set it up. I taught him how to add and delete contacts, take pictures, videos, call, search the internet, and of course how to text. He seemed to like it and he picked it up pretty fast. After a couple of weeks he was texting me and even sending me pictures of random things that he would have otherwise just told me about over the phone. Last Monday he called me to ask if I could come by to help him fix his iPhone. Apparently it had deleted most of his contacts and it didn't let him text or open the camera. I live 10 minutes from his house, so I went by after I got off work. We couldn't figure out what was wrong, but I reset it, the contacts showed back up and he could use the camera again. Before I handed the phone back, I turned on the message share location. I'm very close to my dad and I worry about him, so I thought this was a good idea. My dad calls me, or I call him, every day after I get off work, roughly around 3:30 p.m. or so. On Wednesday I called him on my way home from work, but he didn't pick it, which was unusual. But I figured he was eating or hadn't gotten off work yet. By 5 p.m. I called again and he didn't answer, which started to concern me. I was about to text him when I remember I turned his location on, so I pulled it up, and when I saw where he was my stomach sank. It showed him in the middle of the woods, about 30 miles from his house. I thought something had happened to him, and before I could call Jen, his wife, I received a text. I'm at church practicing the Christmas play. I'll call you when we finish. I felt relief, but I was still confused as to why his location put him in the woods. This wooded area wasn't like a small park. It's over 1,000 acres and far away from where the church is, but I shrugged. It often thought it was his iPhone glitching again. I spoke to him later that night and everything was fine. On Saturday, my dad had a cookout and we all went, my sister, her husband, and their daughter. When I arrived, my dad was cooking on the grill and everyone was inside. It was really hot and humid out, but I stayed with him to keep him company while he cooked. I said hi to him and gave him a hug. I immediately noticed that his hands and forearm had several cuts, similar to a cat or thorn bush scratch. "What happened to your hands?" He must have seen my intrigued face because he put the spatula away and closed the grill. I was gardening without my gloves. His eyes drifted to the garden behind me as he held his hands together behind his back to stretch his chest. "Let's go inside. It's too hot out here," he said as he walked back to the house. The evening was uneventful and we all had a great time. It was late when I got home. I got ready for bed and fell asleep right away. Suddenly my phone starts going off at 2:12 a.m. I keep it next to my bed, but this time I had it under my pillow, so the vibration of it ringing scared the fuck out of me. It was Jen calling. I freaked out because the only reason she would be calling this late is for an emergency. I answered, but there was no one on the other line, just a loud continuous whooshing sound. I thought she might have butt dialed me, but with a touchscreen phone it's hard to believe that happens. I called her back and it went to voicemail. I called my dad and he didn't pick up. A part of me thought she accidentally called me while having her phone under her pillow, and the other part of me believes something is seriously wrong. So again, I pulled up my dad's location and once more he is in the woods 30 miles from his house. I called a couple more times with no luck. At this point I am confused and worried, so I decide to get dressed and go by his house. When I get there I don't see his car anywhere, only Jen's. I contemplate knocking but opt for driving to the location on his phone. I set my GPS and make my way there. The drive felt eternal. The more I drove, the more I realized I was getting further away from the city and entering a small town, one I had never seen before. Guided by my GPS I took exit 51. This town looked deserted, like a very cliché scene from a horror film. I kept looking at my GPS as if it would help me get there faster. The road was foggy and the streets were poorly lit. The driveways were few and far between, most of houses set back from the road and resting on 3 or 4 acres each. Eventually I stopped at a red light right before some train tracks. The area was heavily wooded and the houses appeared to have stopped way back. I'm nervously glancing around while I wait for the light to change. My doors are locked, but I involuntarily continue to check them to make myself feel safer. The light finally changes. I take my foot off the brake and start looking left and right as I slowly drive through the tracks. That's when I see it. To the right, maybe 40 feet away from my car, I caught a glimpse of something off the road, barely visible, hiding behind some tree branches. I stop and look at the GPS. It's taking me to the opposite side of the woods. Maybe it's the entrance to a park, I think to myself out loud, knowing very well it's not. I end the GPS directions. I put my car in reverse and turn. My headlights hit the thing in question head on. It's a white 1996 Toyota. That is my dad's beater. He's had that car for years and only drives it every once in a while. I pull next to it. I sit in my car for a couple seconds trying to talk myself into going back home. But curiosity gets the best of me, so I turn my phone flashlight on, turn the engine off and I get out. Several branches are covering it. They were placed intentionally by someone who obviously didn't want to be seen there. I'm shining my light as I walk around the car making sure it wasn't crashed. I open the driver's door and to my surprise I find my dad's pair of reading glasses and his wallet on the seat, along with a silver necklace with the letter N. There are no keys and no signs of struggle or any blood. I hesitantly walk up to the trunk, but I can't open it. I look at my dad's location and he's still in the same spot. I'm close to him, but I am not willing to walk a mile into these woods. It's now 3:20 a.m. and I'm wondering why the fuck is my dad's car here? I go back to my car and sit down thinking what to do next. I pull my hair into a ponytail and, while 1,000 ideas are running through my head, I want to settle my thoughts, so I decide to call him. I called and to my surprise he answers. "Are you okay?" he asks. "Dad? Yes, I am okay. I think my words very careful. I wasn't expecting him to pick up, so I'm not prepared to ask about his whereabouts. "Why are you calling me this late?" He sounded concerned. "I meant to call someone else." "Did I wake you up?" "I was binge watching a show and I wanted to call this guy I've been talking to." I was leaning forward on the steering wheel, clenching my left hand to the wheel. "It's okay, sweetheart. I've been tossing and turning. I can't sleep," he said, while yawning. "Okay, Dad. I will talk to you later. Good night." I hang up the phone and start my engine. I am surprised, confused, worried and anxious. My dad deliberately lied to me. By now I know that he is okay, but he is not at home sleeping with his wife. He is somewhere in the deep woods doing I don't know what. But whatever it is not normal. I have talked to him every day like we always do, but yesterday something felt off when I called him. He asked me about the guy I've been talking to. It's not uncommon for him to ask things like that, but when I told him that it was just a friend, he said something that left me speechless. "Only a friend? That is a long distance to drive for just a friend." What do you mean?" I asked him, confused, but internally I am wondering if he knew I was there. But how could he? He laughed and told me to forget it and then quickly changed the conversation. I haven't called him today. And he hasn't called me either. I have been wanting to look at his location, but I don't dare to. Story 7, The Antimatter Matter. I have to get something off my chest, and anonymously posting on a subreddit for fictional stories seems like the best way to talk about it without being found out. I think that I've taken enough precautions that the government won't find me, but I have no idea what the NSA is actually capable of these days. Truth be told, I'm not really sure if such safeguards are worth the trouble. They may be able to figure out who I am and who my colleagues were anyway, but I'm mostly off the grid at this point, so I won't make it easy to find me. Besides, for all I know, the event, as I've taken to calling it, could happen tomorrow. Or a million years from now. I'm not an astrophysicist or a climate scientist, so I have no way of knowing when it will happen. I only know that it will happen, and a general idea of the form it will take. I am, or at least, was, a particle accelerator engineer, who specialized in creating and harvesting antimatter. I was the one who developed the mechanism for creating large quantities of heavy antimatter nuclei and capturing them in magnetic containment chambers. That was about a year and a half ago. It was my proudest achievement at the time, perhaps even the thing history would remember me for. Now that I know history has an expiration date, I'm not as enthusiastic as I once was. I can't even publicize the schematics for the remaining time we have. Like everything else, it's been classified at the highest security clearances. Anyone short of POTUS would have trouble accessing them now. To make a long story short, I was able to create macroscopic quantities of anti-iron. My colleagues and I accumulated enough that we had a solid kilogram of the stuff, arranged in a smooth sphere, and let me tell you, taxpayer, it took a heck of a lot of money, time, and energy to do it. Under different circumstances, I might ask myself whether it was worth it in the end. Looking back, I should have known something was amiss when I read papers which suggested that antihydrogen atoms absorb multiple low-energy photons and emit higher-energy photons, the opposite behavior of ordinary matter. I attributed it to a statistical fluke or equipment malfunction. But this anti-iron couldn't be so easily dismissed. For one thing, it glowed, despite the fact that there was no apparent energy source powering it. We tested it with Geiger counters, but we couldn't detect any radiation greater than ordinary background doses. We kept it in a vacuum-sealed magnetic containment chamber. For those of you who aren't aware, when antimatter and matter collide, both are turned into pure energy by Einstein's famous formula, E equals mc2. In practical terms, our sphere of anti-ion would cause an explosion 1,000 times greater than a nuclear bomb if it were permitted to contact even the air in the room. Needless to say, handling it was a delicate business. Our first test, we decided, would be to heat the object up using a carefully calibrated symmetric laser array, to see how it behaved at high temperatures. Even before we came to that decision, the anti-ion began to behave strangely. Our instruments told us it was heating up, but its glow didn't noticeably change, even after its temperature rose past red hot. Ultimately, we decided to move forward with the heating experiment, if only because we didn't think our lasers could heat it much more than it already was. I'm embarrassed to admit that the truth didn't dawn on me until after the anti-ion ball was cooking in our oven. I had some time to let my mind wander, and suddenly, it clicked. I had been thinking about Feynman diagrams, which diagram subatomic particle interactions. In particular, they portray antimatter as moving backward in time. A mathematical artifact, with no bearing in reality, most physicists assumed. They said the same thing about special relativity before Einstein came along. And the more I thought about our sample, the more things started to make sense. The glow we saw wasn't light generated by the anti-ion, but rather the ambient light from the room and the lights above that terminated on its surface. If you were to rewind the process, it would look as if it were absorbing that light, rather than emitting it. And the heating we observed before placing our object in the oven was actually the object cooling down, from its own reversed perspective. For this object, entropy would decrease over time, as opposed to ordinary matter, for which entropy always increases. My thoughts were interrupted by the ding that indicated our oven was done cooking. As I expected, the anti-ion was precisely room temperature, but it was no longer a sphere, the shape an object takes after being melted down in a forceless environment. Shortly afterward the men in black came and shut down our experiment. One of my colleagues was so shaken up by the new shape of our anti-ion sample that she insisted that sinking it into the sun wasn't good enough. If we really wanted to be careful, we'd erase it from the universe by dropping it in a black hole. Last I saw her, she was pleading with the government officials to shoot the sample at the nearest one. I got an email from her a year ago, telling me that Operation Monocerotis is a go, which I can only assume means that our sample is now on its way to annihilation. I guess nobody ever told her that black holes are time-reversed white holes. Or that if you connect a white hole in our universe with a black hole in another, you get a wormhole, which allows things to enter our universe from another one. Somewhere out there, a 1 kilogram, anti-ion statue of a 7-tentacled, 6-eyed thing is slowly drifting toward a black hole. Before it gets there, it will attach itself in some way or another to another much faster, much more massive antimatter object also speeding along from the Earth to the black hole. A ship, perhaps, but more likely a missile. A missile with its nose pointing in the direction it came from. And by the time that happens, there will not be the slightest indication that the Earth has ever had a collision with antimatter that shook it to its core. I got an email from a climate scientist friend of mine the other day. He asked where I've been and told me of his latest research. Apparently, none of the existing climate models are predicting the kind of regular exponential increase in temperature we've been seeing. He says if he didn't know any better, it's almost as if he's watching the Earth cool in reverse. Thank you for taking the time to read my testimony, and may God have mercy on us all. Story 8, I'm a YouTuber and a dead subscriber is haunting me. Ever since I was a child I suffered from really bad anxiety that, over the years, culminated in frequent night terrors. Most of my childhood was spent unable to sleep and too overwhelmed to even try. So when I discovered ASMR when I was about 15, there was a huge sense of relief to find something that could help with that. For once in my life I was able to have full nights of sleep. I've been watching ASMR videos every day since then. About 7 years ago I decided that I too wanted to start helping others relive their anxiety, so I started my own channel. I'm proud to say that, although I'm not the biggest asthmatist out there, my channel has just short of 1 million subscribers. Or it used to have, before I deactivated the channel for the reasons I'm going to discuss now. I guess I should start from the beginning. About 6 months ago I started to notice that a particular subscriber had been leaving comment after comment on every single one of my videos, going back to the first ones years ago. Now, this alone isn't necessarily something to worry about, so I didn't. If anything, it made me feel loved to have this subscriber, as well as many others, to care about me and my content so much. After all, I started doing this to provide the same kind of help that it was given to me once. And it made me happy. I wasn't big enough that I could quit my day job and work only with YouTube, but once I created a Patreon account, things got significantly better. I offered many rewards for my supporters there, including the opportunity to pick specific triggers for videos, such as tapping or crinkling sounds, and even live chats in group or in private. I was still working with my mom on her catering business, but the donations from the subscribers allowed me not worry so much about my next paycheck. I was even able to rent a small place for myself and was loving the experience of living alone for the first time. People would recognize me every now and then, and I would sometimes take pictures and give autographs to a few subscribers. The ones who were too shy to ask for a photo would usually wave at me and say hello, sleepyheads, because that was the way that I started every single one of my videos. My fan base was solid, and some subscribers I knew on a first-name basis. If any of you are reading this, I love you so much and want to thank you for all your support over the years. I'm sorry I can't make videos anymore. One more month passed, and this particular subscriber, FlowerChild09, continued to leave very detailed and flattering comments on my videos, to a point where some of them sounded kinda sexual. Maybe not actually sexual, but at least flirty. I stopped responding to them after that. Now, about 3 months ago was when things began to really worry me. My mom, who had a catering business, also made cakes for weddings, birthdays or any other special occasions. And as her assistant, I was usually the one to receive the costumers and pick up their orders. One day this young woman showed up at the store, looking to order a cake for her girlfriend. She wanted a strawberry shortcake with lemon filling, and since this is a very uncommon flavor, and also my favorite, I made a comment about it. She then smiled and told me that she wasn't surprised since I kind of resembled her girlfriend. I'm not one of those people who think everyone is flirting with me when they're just trying to be nice, but I definitely thought she was flirting with me. Which was odd, because she was there ordering a cake for her girlfriend. I tried being less friendly and it helped. She then told me that the cake needed to be delivered at the address she gave me on the following Wednesday, her 6-month anniversary with her girlfriend. The date rolls around, and I'm at that address around 7 p.m. like she requested. She opens the door holding some balloons and ribbons, and I figure she's still setting things up for the part. She asks me to put the cake in the kitchen and that she'll meet me in a second to sign the paper saying she received the cake in order. When I get in the kitchen, the table is set up for a very fancy dinner for 2 with wine and the food already on the plates. Something bothers me about the scene, even though I don't know what exactly. The table is all set, the lights, the decorations, the cake is here. But where is the girlfriend? When I turn around, I find her staring at me, holding a huge box wrapped with shiny red paper and a bow on top. She smiles and tries to give me the present. I'm frozen in shock. I'm the girlfriend. Me. Or at least that's what she thinks. She then tells me that she's FlowerChild09, and that her real name is Natalie. That she loved me ever since she first saw one of my videos, and that if I give us a chance, she's sure she can make me happy. My first instinct was to run, and I all remember was her screaming my name, not the name I use on my channel, my real name, over and over again. I still don't remember telling her that. I told my mom all about this crazy stalker girl and she told me to go to the police. I was too scared and a little embarrassed too, so I decided not to. I was afraid they would judge me for putting my life online, as this was basically asking to be staked, or not believing that Natalie would offer me any danger because she was a girl. She left more comments, so I blocked her. Things went quiet after that. Or so I thought. Last month I was getting ready for recording some of the videos requested on Patreon when someone joined in with the highest quota, which was $60, and allowed you to have all the other rewards from the previous quotas, but also a one-on-one live chat of 30 minutes, once a month. This wasn't an unusual thing, although most of the high quota patrons were old-timers that I've known for years. I scheduled the chat for later that day and went on with my activities. When it was time for the video chat, I was met with a completely dark screen. Thinking that the patron wasn't aware of how dark it was, I said my usual greeting and asked them to turn on the lights. With a flicker noise, a small orange light was shining from the corner. Probably a bedside lamp. When the patron finally sat in front of the computer, I could not believe my eyes. It was her. Natalie. Her eyes were swollen from crying and she looked sickly thin, like she'd been starving herself. I said I was going to close the window, but she begged me not to. At least not before she could explain herself and ask for my forgiveness. Natalie then began saying that she knew that she had crossed the line, and that I was right to be afraid of her after that day. She told me that she tried to forget about me and let go, but that she fell in love. We belonged together, she said. The conversation went somewhat normally, until she seemed to reverse to some sort of previous resolution and started to talk once again about how we could be happy together. And if we couldn't be girlfriends, she at least wanted to be my friend. She just wanted to stay by my side badly. That made me frustrated and angry, and I lashed out at her, saying that she was crazy and that I would never, not even in a million years, be with someone like her. She got the gun so fast, I only noticed the barrel on her mouth after she pulled the trigger. Her body fell out of the frame. I stared at her blood-covered wall, unblinking. When the reality of what happened fully registered, I began to cry uncontrollably. I had pushed her too far, and she snapped. She was dead because of me. Life hasn't been normal after that. I quit YouTube right away and even stopped working with my mom for a while. Even though I know she is dead, I saw her dying. Every time the front door of my mom's shop opened, I was afraid I would see her there, walking towards me, carrying that damn red box. Smiling. Every time I tried closing my eyes to sleep, I saw the shining metal sticking out of her mouth and her red-tinted wall. The image would not disappear from my mind. I began having night terrors again, and not even ASMR could help this time. My problems weren't derivative from anxiety. Not anymore. I began hearing her. In the middle of the night, she whispers my name over and over, but I awake to find the room empty. I moved back into my mom's house. I'm too afraid to even think about being alone. Some nights, I even sleep on her bed, thinking that the company will ease the bad thoughts and keep Natalie away from me. But just as I am about to relax, I can hear her whispering hello sleepyhead right beside my ear. Like Natalie said, she just wanted to be by my side. Story 9, The Men Without Faces. It's important to note before I begin to dive into this story that I did not kill any of them. No matter how much you start to think I did, no matter how much I try to convince you otherwise, I will tell you now for certain that I did not kill anyone. Although this story begins in several places, I think the best part to start would be when we actually arrived at Raspberry Springs. There were 6 of us: Tom, Lance, Adam, Brent, and myself. The camping trip had been Brent's idea, but we'd all been eager to escape our monotonous lives for a few days, so the planning process went fairly quickly. The air was crisp, as it always is in the winters, and the scent of pine carried on the wind was the perfect start to what was supposed to be a relaxing weekend trip but would soon become a waking nightmare. We set up camp, and as we passed a bottle of Maker's Mark around the fire, we told each other horror stories that we'd been told when we had been young boys out camping with our uncles and fathers. After Tom had finished telling us the story that used to scare him as a kid involving a babysitter and a statue of a clown that wasn't a statue at all, the stories fell silent for a moment. We listened to the crickets in the distance and the cracking of the fire as it devoured the dry pine branches we fed it. "I've got one," Adam finally said. "This one's a little different though." The rest of us stared at him expectantly. "This one's true, at least I think it is." He raised his hands up defensively, the bottle of liquor sloshing around in his hand. "Now before you all start giving me shit about it, just listen to the story." He took a sip of whiskey from the half-empty bottle, then stared into the fire as he spoke. "There are old Ute legends about the men without faces, but I don't think for anyone for sure know where they came from, just like how nobody knows where Bigfoot came from, although the stories of the indigenous people do their best. It's a story my grandpa told me, that's where I first heard of them. The story goes that there was a group of Indians that were kicked out of their own tribe for shameful hunting practices. The Native Americans were adamant about using the whole animal, as you know, and they believed heavily in being one with the earth, and they believed that disrespect of the earth was a capital offense. These guys though, maybe a dozen or so, hunted and killed for sport. They would kill a buffalo, for example, and cut out its heart and eat it raw and leave the body to rot to show their supremacy over Mother Earth and nature. They believed they were gods of the land and dominant over all other life. One of these guys, the leader I think, was the chief's son, and when the chief found out what his son was doing he was devastated. He set a trap with his best warriors and caught them in the act of ritualistic killing. He could have had his son executed right then and there, probably should have, but couldn't bring himself to make the judgment, so instead he banished them from the tribe. These warriors were furious with the chief for kicking them out, and it wasn't long after that the members of the tribe started going missing. Whole hunting parties would leave their homes and never return. Then as search parties were sent out, the bodies of these hunters were found with their hearts cut out. The banished men had started hunting people instead of animals and cutting out their hearts to eat and show their superiority over the tribe from which they had been banished. The chief got word of this and called upon a shaman who put a curse on the men to make them pay for what they'd done and to mark them for eternity so that they would be known for generations to come. This curse, as the story goes, removed their faces and left them to walk the earth forever, blind and speechless, unable to hunt or communicate with each other, so that they would fall victim time and time again to the earth and would learn their place. But these men were smart and resourceful, and although they weren't able to see or speak, they could still hear and feel and learned to communicate by knocking on trees and would hunt by the sounds they heard. They used their curse to become more lethal, more silent than they had ever been. They're still supposed to be out there, somewhere, hunting lost men, but instead of just cutting out their hearts, the men without faces would cut off the faces of their killers well and wear them on their own blank heads. Adam took another long pull from the whiskey bottle until Lance asked the question. "So, what about this makes it a true story?" "There are tons of Indian legends out there, man. This sounds just like one of those skinwalker stories they'd tell their kids to make sure they didn't wander off into the woods alone." "I'm getting to that," Adam said. "When I was 12, I went camping with my uncles. The first night we heard a bunch of knocking like someone was hitting branches together, and on the second night one of my uncles went missing. They never found the body." He took another drink. "I was sharing the tent with him that night. My uncle, I mean, the one who went missing. It was me and him in one tent and my two other uncles in the other. I woke up 'cause I heard that knocking. I'd heard it the night before as well, further away on the other side of the lake, but this time it sounded like it was coming from right behind me, on the other side of the canvas of the tent. I listened to for a while, waiting for it to go away, but it didn't. It just kept getting louder and faster. It was like Morse code almost, with a strange beat but deliberate in a way I couldn't understand. Eventually I couldn't take it anymore and I woke my uncle up. Part of me was afraid he would wake up and it would suddenly stop, or he just wouldn't hear it, but as soon as his eyes were open, he was sitting up in bed. He tried to play it cool, I think, so he wouldn't scare me, but I could tell he was scared. He grabbed the pistol from his bag in the corner of the tent and told me to stay there and stay quiet no matter what. He unzipped the flap of the tent and stepped out. I could hear him moving around in the dirt, could hear the shuffle of feet against the brush, but that was it. There wasn't a scream, there wasn't a shout, there wasn't a gunshot. I sat there in terrified silence and waited in the tent until the sun came up and I heard my uncles getting up in their own tent. I told myself my uncle had gone and bunked with them, or maybe had forgotten to tell me everything was alright before going to see about catching fish for breakfast. I told myself a lot of things to keep me going that night, but when my other two uncles got up and came to our tent and asked me where my other uncle was, I broke down. Rangers were called, search parties were formed, but we never saw a trace of my uncle again. It was like he had completely vanished off the face of the earth. When Adam's story finished, the rest of us sat in silence for a few minutes, trying to figure out how best to approach the story. It was Brent who spoke up first. You know, there's plenty of stuff that could have happened to your uncle, right? You don't really think it was these faceless dudes, right? Adam sat silently, staring into the fire. He took a final gulp from the bottle and passed it to me. I don't know what I believe, honestly. I grew up justifying the noises I heard and eventually came to terms with the idea that he probably wandered off, got lost, got hurt, and never made it back to camp. But it's always been there in the back of my head, you know? The question has always been there. Nobody else knew what to say. For some reason the solemnity with which Adam told his story was unsettling, and I don't think I was the only one feeling that way, because soon after, Tom stood up and announced that Adam was the winner of the scary storytelling for the night and that he was going to bed. Lance followed him, then shortly after Brent did as well. When it was only me and Adam left, I finally voiced my question. You really think it's a possibility? What? He asked the faceless tribe, I mean. He smiled at me and I could tell he'd had too much to drink. Nah, he said, swatting with his hand like my question was a bothersome fly. It was just a story. My uncle probably just fell down a gorge or something and got picked up by the coyotes. Yeah, I said, giving him a smile as fake as the one he was giving me. You're probably right. I'm going to bed, he said. If you hear the knocking though, don't leave your tent. Then he stood up and staggered off to his own tent. I poured some water over the fire and threw some dirt on the embers. I knew Adam's story was bogus, or at least I told myself that, but as I crawled into my own tent, I could have sworn that out in the distance, maybe on the other hill across from the river, I could hear a low thumping sound, like branches being struck against a tree stump. Story 10, I had a twin. His name was Silas. While we were genetically identical, no one ever really considered us identical twins. Even when we were born, he was just shy of double my size, due to my umbilical cord being damaged. He was so much larger, Mom had to get a C-section so I wouldn't die as they delivered him. As a result, I ended up firstborn instead. We always made jokes about it. He called me his prototype all the time. As we got older, he stayed larger. I got sick more, was accident prone. But I was always smarter as a result, because I learned to love reading. As we hit puberty, though, I finally caught up, and passed him. It was the drugs. With Mom and Dad fighting, I became class clown. Our sisters, also twins, it doesn't just run in our family, it gallops, closed in, losing friends, becoming more focused on each other, and Silas turned to drugs. Painkillers to start. I had gotten plenty prescription, but I didn't like them, didn't like the way they felt. He and Dad would fight over who got the leftovers. Not long after we turned 21, Dad left for Australia and an online girlfriend. Silas followed him, while the girls and I worked to help Mom. Dad got deported, but Silas stayed. I only saw Dad one more time, at a cousin's wedding. Didn't even talk. After that, he took off to Europe and yeah, not the point. Anyway, Silas stayed in Australia for a while. Dad's online girlfriend, her ex-husband, he kept us up to date on things until Silas boarded a ship. We got a few postcards, but it was sporadic, years in between. Then last year I got a phone call. I need to come home, I need to hear the song. Silas? Yeah. Are you okay? No. I need to hear it, Simon. Okay, what song? The song. The song, from when we were kids. We made it. Our song. I thought back. I remembered we had a tune we'd hum, Well, he'd whistle it, but I never could whistle. It was mostly to find each other. Hadn't done it since we were maybe 10 or so. Couldn't quite remember how it went. Yeah? Man, I don't know. Uck, you let me know where you are, I'll find a way to get you home. Is this a good number? No, I'm on my way. He disconnected. I tried back, but it just rang and rang. It was an Oregon number. I let Mom and the girls know. We didn't hear from him for a couple more months. When he called Mom, she said he was rambling about the song. Didn't make any sense. She didn't try the number back, because it was somewhere overseas. Denmark, when we looked it up. It was 12 days ago. Mom got a call. They had a body in South Africa, pretty sure it was his. Since she'd worked for an airline, getting there wasn't too big a problem. She asked me to join her. They brought us in, and pulled back the sheet. He looked so old. So worn. It was my face, but with scars and damage I never had. Please stop, Mom said, grabbing my arm. Sorry, what? You were whistling. I hadn't. Sorry. We arranged for transport home. Twice on the plane, she asked me to stop whistling. I knew I wasn't, reminded her I was the one who couldn't, after I bashed up my mouth when I was 5. They had to wire my jaw, and put a guard behind my lips so the holes torn through could heal. I was worried about her. Then she said I was whistling when we were in the car. What was I whistling? I already knew the answer. That ridiculous tune. Your song. I'd got the rest of the week off work so I could stay with her. The next couple days, she kept telling me to stop whistling. I wrote it off as grief. But then the funeral came. We kept it small. He didn't have many friends, and most of the friends we had never knew him. He'd been gone so long. A couple aunts and uncles made it. The girls made it, too. And I was in the basement, when one of them said, I thought you couldn't whistle. I can't. You talked to Mom, I take it? What? She keeps hearing me whistling when I'm not. It's got me worried. Well, you were whistling just now. That annoying tune you and Silas had. You sure? Simon, it's just you and me down here, and I never could get that tune right. I shrugged it off for her, but I was worried. I couldn't hear the whistling. I knew it wasn't me, but something told me I needed to remember the tune. I had to hear. And my gut said I'd need to hear it soon. I asked Mom to record it next time, but it took a couple days. She sent me the file, something I thought I'd need to help her with, but no. I didn't listen to it then. It wasn't until the end of the week. I was driving back home, leaving Mom's at 4 a.m. There's a long stretch with choppy country and talk radio as the only stations on the way, so I always play stuff from my phone. I was listening to the last bit of the Star Wars radio play, and when it ended I expected music, which is technically what came on, but it was the whistling. I slammed on the brakes, pulled my car to the side of the road, slipping into the fog. My heart was beating hard, so hard I should have had trouble hearing, but the whistling was clear. I felt like something was in the back seat, watching me, waiting for the humming. The voice came with a hand on my shoulder, slender, skeletal. Part of me wanted to slam on the gas, take off. But enough of me realized it wouldn't get me away from what was there. Silas would still be in the back seat. It's been a while, he whispered. I resisted the urge to turn around, to look in the mirror, to catch any glimpse of him. What you been up to, prototype? I wanted to scream, to shriek, but I knew I need to stay quiet. I got this idea a little while back. I felt his other hand on my other shoulder. I saw my knuckles turning white around the steering wheel, and then I felt him shifting his position. My eyes slammed shut. You and I should never have been apart. I felt his weight moving into the front of the car. We should have been one person. I felt his knees touching mine, and his hands were holding mine now, as if he was seated right in front of me. As if the car wasn't in the way. I wanted to peek so I could see how he was positioned, but then I felt his breath on my face, smelled the stagnant, embalming fluid stench. One healthy baby boy, born on that October morning. Strong and smart. I felt his arms and legs, bending the wrong way, lining up with mine, his nose and belly and chest, all of it lining up. A whole soul, instead of the fractured pieces we've been. I heard the scream before I realized it was coming from me, and then it stopped as something shot down my throat. I felt us melding, one soul, a whole soul. I opened my eyes and the door, stumbled out, and puked in the ditch. There was hair and fingernails, chunks of flesh. I puked again. And again. Thankfully, it was raining now, washing it away. By the end, I was dry heaving, curled in a ball, crying. It was about an hour later I got back in my car. My phone was dead, water damaged. It wouldn't charge again after that. I drove the rest of the way home without incident. That was last week. I was talking to my mom yesterday, and she asked how my business trip went last week. I went to correct her, but then I remembered it. I was in Atlanta for a company meeting. There was no funeral. There was no Silas. It's always been just me. I have a lifetime of memories without a twin, but I know they aren't real. Or maybe, they weren't real, but now. I don't know. But I need to get that phone working. If I can hear that recording, hear the whistling, one more time, prove that I had a twin, maybe I won't feel so lonely. Story 11, My Daughter's New Friend. After my wife died a few years ago, I took our then 4-year-old daughter, Carly, and moved back to my hometown. I hadn't been in my childhood home for close to 25 years. My best friend, Michael, had died back when we were 12 from a freak accident. My parents packed us up and moved us across the country nearly a week after. I didn't realize how much I missed the house, but as we began to get more comfortable, I noticed my daughter acting strange. We'd been in the house around 3 years when shit hit the fan. Carly was never much of a talker, but I began to overhear her talking to herself nearly every night. When I would ask her who she was talking to, she'd just say it was her friend. I let it go for a while, thinking she was just going through that imaginary friend stage that all kids go through. However, a few days later, a new development in the case occurred. I had just put Carly to bed and was cleaning up downstairs when I began to hear noise. I listened quietly for a minute. It seemed there was a thumping coming from upstairs. It had been a long day and I was really not in the mood for her shit. I marched upstairs to her room and quickly opened her door, hoping to catch her in the act of whatever she was doing. When I opened the door, however, I saw Carly sleeping soundly in her bed. I walked over quietly, thinking she may be faking. Then I heard the thumping again and realized that it wasn't actually coming from her room. No, it sounded like it was coming from the hallway, perhaps like something falling down the stairs. I exited quietly and looked over the banister to the bottom of the steps, but saw nothing. I was a bit freaked out, but just assumed it was our dog playing with a toy or something. I went to bed, letting the strange occurrence leave my mind. A few days later, I'd all but forgotten about the stairs incident when something equally as freaky happened. Carly was sitting at the dinner table, drawing, while I prepared dinner for us. I was beginning to set the table when I snuck a glance at Carly's drawing. She had drawn a cute picture of what appeared to be a small boy. He had light brown hair and blue eyes. She had paid great attention to detail and I was actually very impressed. Right as I was about to mention how nice it was, she picked up a dark red crayon and began scribbling all over the page. "Sweetie? Why are you messing up your picture?" I asked, confused. "I'm not," she replied back, still scribbling hard with the red. "I'm just making it look like my friend." This really confused me, but I just let it go. Sometimes it was easier to just let her do what she wanted instead of trying to make sense of it. We ate our dinner and went to bed for the night. The following night, I was putting Carly to bed when I noticed her drawing from the night before laying on the floor near her closet. "Can you put that with the others?" Carly asked from her bed. "Sure, where?" I asked, looking around the room. "In the closet." I opened the closet door and pieces of paper flooded out, covering the bedroom floor. I picked a few up and began to look over them. They were all pretty repetitive. One drawing depicted two young boys, holding hands. One was the boy from the red drawing, with brown hair and blue eyes. The other boy looked a lot like Carly, with red hair and bright green eyes. Then, there was the red-covered boy from the previous night. Lastly, there was a picture that showed the brown-haired boy lying near what looked to be a set of stairs. These three images were duplicated dozens of times. "Carly, what is all of this?" I asked, worry creeping into my voice. "It's my friend," she said softly, sitting up in her bed. I held up the picture of the two boys. "Is one of these boys your friend?" Carly shook her head, climbing out of bed and walking over to me. She picked up one of the red boy pictures. "This is what he looks like now. Why is he all red?" "That's his blood." I felt my breath catch in my throat as my heart nearly stopped. My blood ran cold as I scanned the small bedroom. I knew what I need to ask next, but was really struggling to get the words out, terrified that I already knew the answer. "What is your friend's name?" I said, almost in a whisper. "Michael." I froze as I looked at the drawing in my hand. Then, down at the one of the two boys. I suddenly realized, the other boy in the drawing was me. Suddenly, I was taken back to that day all those years ago. Michael and I had gotten into a fight over some stupid game and he wanted to leave my house. I don't know what had came over me that day, but this really pissed me off. When Michael started down the stairs, I shoved him as hard as I could. I watched Michael tumble down the stairs, his head slamming into each and every step. I stood quietly at the top of the stairs, watching him bleed out for a few minutes before calling my mother. I wanted to make sure he was dead. I told my mother that Michael had tripped and fell down the stairs. Nobody had ever doubted my story. "I know what you did, Daddy." Carly's soft voice brought me back to reality. I looked down at her, standing in front of me with her arms crossed over her chest. I knew what I had to do. I only hoped I could get her blood out of the new carpet at the bottom of the stairs. Story 12, Sweet Haunted Baby Girls. Hello to whomever is reading this. After much internal debate, I've decided that I should share my story. It was an incredibly tough decision as it involves my children, but I'm scared, and could use some advice. Let me start off by telling you a little bit about my family. For confidentiality, due to my husband and I's success in the social media world, you can call us Memory and Roland. I'm sorry I don't feel comfortable giving our real names, but a quick Google search of our names and you'd see why I'd rather be anonymous here. You see, I'm a pretty successful beauty/mommy vlogger, and my husband is the lead vocalist in an extremely successful a cappella group that just landed a huge record deal. We are very blessed to have the careers we have, though being in the public eye all the time can be pretty stressful, especially in our current situation. After my husband and I got married, and had the honeymoon of a lifetime in the Bahamas, he moved into my apartment with me while we searched for our first home. Our careers blessed us with a rather large budget, and we found an amazing realtor. We spent months looking for our dream home. We saw some absolutely exquisite homes that met all of our expectations, but I could never settle on any of them. I didn't know what exactly I was looking for, but I figured I'd know it when I saw it, much to my husband and realtor's dismay. So, we kept looking. One day, our realtor told us she had a house to show us but it was over budget. We agreed to at least look at it, and we drove with her to the address. The moment I saw it, I just knew. This was it. It wasn't the appearance either, it was just a feeling I had. Not that the appearance was bad. It was a 2-story brick beauty with a lovely yard, housing 3,000 square feet, 5 bedrooms, a huge walk-in closet in the master bedroom, a must-have for a beauty vlogger, 4.5 baths, formal living room, spacious family room, a kitchen straight off a Food Network, and a 3-car garage. It also had an attic, and a finished basement. It was a breathtaking home. But it was more than that. Something inside me felt like I was home the moment we walked into the front foyer. And, as weird as it sounds, it seemed like the house was happy to see me too. We made an offer, and it was accepted quickly. We moved in on the day after closing. 6 weeks after moving in, I found out I was 6 weeks pregnant with our twin girls. I took it as a good omen. I think I was wrong. Paris and London were born July 23, 2014, on my 21st birthday. Roland and I fell in love immediately with their golden curls and cherubic faces. They were perfect. When we took them home, they quickly adapted to sleeping all night, and unless they absolutely needed changed or a bottle, they rarely cried. Family and friends told us constantly how lucky we were to have such good, happy babies. Our girls recently turned 4. Watching them grow together has been an amazing thing to witness. Their bond is so strong. You hear about twin telepathy, well, these two have it down pat. They love being dressed alike, they want to do everything together, they have their own language they communicate in, they do it all. They have recently begun talking fluently, and strange things have started happening. At first, I thought it was cute. When they started calling each other Susan and Anna, I thought it was some twin nickname thing. Innocent enough. Then they'd argue about who was older. Paris was born 5 minutes earlier than London, but London would call herself Big Sissy. Simple sibling rivalry, I reasoned. My husband and I laughed it off. But then, they started saying things that scared me. Never when their father was in the room, either. They would only say these things when I was alone with them, putting them to bed, or getting them ready, etc. You were our mommy before. Where's our real daddy? This is where my old room was. I was a bit spooked by these comments, but thought maybe they were repeating things they'd heard on TV. Until tonight. After tucking them into their matching pink quilted beds, making sure their favorite Disney princess nightlight was turned on, and kissing them goodnight 48,570,923,487,592 times, I was making my way out of their room when Paris whispered, "The man says goodnight too." "What man is that?" I asked the man that killed us before. "He's behind the door. He says you'll see him soon." Story 13, The Guardian of the Forest. Ever since I was a child I lived in a small village by a large forest which no one ever entered. Ever since I was allowed to go out by myself I was told to never venture into the forest by myself, or they would get me. I never understood what they were, until a fateful day I will be writing about today. Now on to the story. My name is Oliver Painert. Back when my encounter occurred I was 8, I was quite the rebellious 8-year-old, I wouldn't really listen to my parents. I was out playing with a tennis racket and a tennis ball, it was getting towards sundown, when I hit the ball accidentally into the forest. Any normal 8-year-old would just get their parents to get it, not me though, I was an independent 8-year-old. I wandered into the forest and looked for my ball. When I found it and went to turn around to leave, the thing I saw terrified me. Even to this day I still shiver when I see it. It was tall and black, it had 4 legs, it had the body of a spider, it had a skull for a head, it laughed a maniacal laugh. I didn't think, I just ran in the opposite direction. I kept running and so did it. I was so scared I couldn't think. I eventually came to a dead end. There was a cliff face. When I turned the thing came out of the woods, it walked slowly into the moonlit cliff face, it launched at me and bit my arm. I yelled in pain, I thought I was going to die. I prayed to God for someone to help me. And just like that, he came. There was a bright flash, it blinded me for half a second. I heard a screech coming from the beast, it released my arm and cowered back. When my eyesight came back, I saw him. He was tall, well over 6 foot. His face was black, he had hair sticking out of the back of his hair looked like a brush, thin and wavy, his face and skin was pitch black, he had what seemed like a small beak at the front of his face, his eyes were a piercing blue, he had long large horns, antlers even, he wore a coat that completely enfolded his huge body, he had a long skinny black tail. In his hand he held a lantern. His hand had sharp pointy fingers, they were also black. Another bright flash came from the lantern, he took a step towards it. The thing ran into the forest quickly. He looked down at me, he knelt down and spoke in a deep but soft voice. "Who might you be?" he said, extending his hand. "My name's Oliver," he chuckled. "There is no reason to be afraid, Oliver, I will not hurt you." He looked at my arm. "You are hurt," he said, extending his long slender hand over my wound. A large bright flash blinded me again. When I regained my eyesight again for a third time, the pain was completely gone, and when I looked at the wound, there was only a scar. "Come now, we must get you back," he said, standing up. He held out his hand and gestured me to hold it. I held his hand. It was warm and cold at the same time. He lit the lantern again, then we ventured off into the woods. While we were walking, I said, "Are you one of them?" I said, intrigued. "Oh no, I'm not one of them. I am the guardian of this forest. I look after the villagers and care for the spirits of this forest. You are the first person I have had to guide out," he said, chuckling. We reached the opening. I let go of his hand and walked towards the opening. I looked behind and he was gone. I shouted "Thank you" as I ran out of the opening. When I got out, my mother and father ran over and hugged me. "Oliver, where on earth have you been?" "We've been looking everywhere." My father looked at me and said sternly, "We told you not to enter the forest, didn't we?" "I'm okay, because of the guardian," I said sincerely. "Now Oliver, you know that it is just a fairy tale." "No, I definitely saw him, he protected me." My father chuckled and said, okay, we believe you." They didn't believe what I saw, but I defiantly saw him. I have gone back into the forest multiple times since then to find him, but to no avail. But I know he exists, and I know he's out there. Story 14, Symbiosis. I attend a more or less unremarkable high school in the southern tier of New York State. The high school is situated in a small town where not much seems to happen. Everyone is pretty average. Average teens, average parents, average teachers. Except for one girl. Her name was Julienne. She had long and silky smooth black hair down to her hips, bright green eyes, and plump breasts. I secretly resented her, because despite the fact that she had a boyfriend, she always got tons of attention from boys. Her boyfriend's name was Jared and he was the quarterback for the high school's football team. He tended to attract all of the attention from the girls, and therefore everyone always envied this wonderfully perfect couple. I share history class with Julienne. We didn't have assigned seats, but today Julienne decided to sit next to me. Instead of paying attention to the lecture, I just kept sneaking envious glances over at her perfect body. Perfect cheekbones, perfect arms and fingernails. But something happened to catch my eye. In certain places of her body, there were these small and almost unnoticeable black lines all over her. You'd have to be really focusing to see them, but they were definitely there. I was so distracted by this that I realized I dropped my pencil. I scooted my chair out from under the table so I could lean down and pick it up. When I sat back up, I saw long, light tan spider legs extending from Julienne's arm. I almost screamed, but remembering I was in a classroom setting, I quickly clasped my hands over my mouth. As soon as I saw the spider legs, they seemed to have disappeared, making me wonder if that was just a hallucination. Julienne's arm looked normal again. Did Julienne notice? I looked up to meet her green eyes. Her mouth was slightly agape and her eyes were as wide as mine. We share a silent stare for a few seconds before she suddenly gets up and leaves. Nobody seems to take notice of it, perhaps they simply assume she visited the bathroom. She doesn't come back for the rest of the class. The rest of the day, my mind is distracted by what I saw, or at least what I thought I saw. It wasn't like I could tell one of my friends what happened. I could see the conversation now. "Anna, you saw the most popular girl in school have an insect coming out of her arm? Listen, we're all jealous of Julienne, but I thought you were above starting rumors and spreading lies." I sighed as I reached my locker. I entered my number combination and opened the door to get supplies needed for my next class. Once satisfied, I closed the door to reveal Julienne standing just behind it. I jumped. "Hey, Anna," she said in that soft voice of hers. I was surprised that she knew my name. "I'm sorry for freaking you out earlier. I was maybe just wondering if you'd like to come over to my house after school? We could watch a movie or something. You seem like such a nice girl and I feel bad for never hanging out with you." I furrowed my eyebrows in confusion. The most popular girl in school wanted to spend time with me? This entire day was really starting to feel surreal. But, seeing as she was offering something so pleasant, I thought, why not? I pushed what I saw earlier out of my head and took out my phone. Sure. I say cheerfully. What's your number or maybe address? After a few minutes dedicated to sharing information, we had made a plan. She said she was going home a little bit early and that when I was finished with school I could come right over. She left to go to her next class and I didn't see her for the rest of the day. When school ended, it was about 3. Julienne said it only took 15 minutes to get to her house, so I should expect to get there at 3:15. I pulled out Google Maps and entered the address Julienne gave me. I followed the directions into what looked like a pretty ritzy neighborhood. The houses were bigger than most, especially mine, and seemed to have expansive yards, complete with in-ground pools. Maybe hanging at Julienne's house would have been a good time after all. Your destination is on your left, said the maps instructor. I look up and see presumably Julienne's house. It looked just as big as the ones around it. I didn't see any sign of life outside, however, not even a car in the driveway. Did her parents even know that I was coming over? I take out my phone. I think I'm here, I text to her. Because I'm awkward, I don't like just entering someone's house without knowing for sure it was the house I was supposed to go to. I feel a buzz from my phone. Yeah, I see you. Come on in, she replies. My eyes shoot back up to the house. The windows were all covered with curtains and I saw no movement. How did she see me but I couldn't see her? Shaking my head, I walk up to the ornate doorway and grab the door handle. I push it open and step inside. Giving a glance around the house, I see a great staircase that leads to the upstairs, and a hallway that lead to the kitchen. In the middle of the hallway was a door that was ajar. I was about to call out for Julienne, but instead I feel another buzz from my phone. I look down and it says, "Come to the basement." Oh, perhaps she had a furnished basement for our movie? I always wanted one of those. I have even begged my mother to make one out of our basement, but she said that it gets too damp down there. I looked at the door ajar in the hallway. Something told me that this lead to the place Julienne wanted me to go. I open the door wider and glance down to see steps leading into darkness. There was no visible light switch. Julienne? I call. Yeah? What are you waiting for? Come down. She said in an enthusiastic tone. I hesitated, who wouldn't? Why am I going into someone else's dark basement? I could smell something musty drifting from the darkness. If it was a furnished basement, it'd probably smell better than this, right? Ignoring my gut instinct to get the hell out of there, I slowly descend the steps before I realize that there was a light coming from down here. I just couldn't see it from the top of the steps. It was a single light bulb, swinging from a wire attached to somewhere on the ceiling. The surface below my feet felt like cement. I could only see about 2 feet around me under the light of the bulb. I suddenly see Julienne step into the light. She's wearing a casual smile and is holding her hands behind her back. Before I can ask any questions, she starts talking. I think you saw something earlier today that you weren't supposed to see. My eyes widen. The spider legs. Was it real? As if answering my question, she lets her hands become visible and starts speaking again. When I was younger, I got into a horrible accident. I was permanently deformed. No amount of plastic surgery could make me look normal again. So, I found an alternative. I'm about to show you the real me. Suddenly, as if on cue, parts of her body suddenly fell off of her and scattered around like bugs. It was at this moment that I realized it was bugs. Huge insects and spiders detached themselves from Julienne's body and scattered around on the floor I stood on. Some were the same shade as Julienne's skin. Looking back up at Julienne, I suppressed the urge to puke. She was missing an arm, and even an eye. There was simply a gaping hole where her eye should have been. The rest of her face looked sunken, as opposed to the normal and full face she normally had. I looked at her head, and saw a deformed scalp that was only partially covered by her long black hair. Moving my eyes to her chest, one of her breasts were completely missing. Her legs were missing chunks of flesh and were scarred with large red marks going up and down her thighs. "Instead of surgery, I met these little guys," she said, motioning to the bugs on the ground. "Some were as big as my arm, and I realized that was what she must have used for her arm. In exchange for making me look normal, I feed them and provide protection. I suppose you could say we have a symbiotic relationship," she says with a small giggle. "Okay, let's get back together, now," she said to the bugs, which all attached themselves to her as if magically. Once together, she looked whole again. That was why I saw her with those black lines earlier. Those lines indicate where one bug starts and another ends. Looking closely, I could see small beetles that came together to make her eye, and some furry spiders that made up her hair. She looked at me one last time and said, "You won't tell Jared, will you?" I staggered backwards before making a beeline for the stairs. I ran up them, my feet thumping each step, and sprinted out the front door. I didn't stop sprinting until I reached my house. I locked the door behind me. I ran upstairs and curled up onto my bed, shaking and crying from the terrifying sights I witnessed. I didn't leave my room for the rest of the day. As much as I dreaded going to school the next day, I got ready as I usually did. What was I supposed to do after seeing that? Just ignore Julienne for the rest of the school year? Well, it turned out that I wouldn't have to worry about it. I didn't see Julienne that day. In fact, I never saw Julienne ever again. It seemed as though nobody had remembered her. When I described her to my friends, they all looked at me like I was nuts. Jared seemed unfazed by her sudden disappearance. Looking through my phone, I saw that her contact information had been erased without me even noticing. There was even a different family in the house that Julienne had lived in. Because of all this, I thought that maybe what happened was all an illusion. But what I saw that day still haunts me. It probably always will. Story 15. Virtual therapy. So, tell me how it feels? What are your thoughts right now? There was a deafening silence, the tension in the room was palpable. Look, I can't help you if you don't talk to me. You understand? I was never someone who would push patients to speak, but this case was particularly frustrating, and that is why it was all the more important that he spoke. Darren's apprehension did him no favors. Can you blame him, though? Often my kind of patients go under serious stress I need to beat out of them, otherwise, what's the point in conjuring up such a place? For God's sake, how do you even get through and help a patient who won't even speak? They don't make it easy. Sarah said, lighting up a cigarette, taking long, melancholic drags. For a therapist, she was abrasive and a touch aggressive. God knows what the lad has been through. It's rare you get someone coming to us, and not saying anything. It's like he wants help but doesn't quite know why or how. I replied. I would call myself the compassionate one out of the duo. The good cop. My hatred for Sarah was never made obvious, but it sours my mouth with every word I speak to her. Sarah knew rightly, but doesn't care enough to do anything about it and kept smoking in contempt silence. Flicking the butt on the ground, she proceeded back inside. Following close behind, I contemplated new strategies, ways to get Darren to open up about his problems. I was part of a trial he finally let out. Sighing heavily, hands shaking. It was apparent he was holding back tears. It sounded like a pretty good deal. Couple of £100 to test some new technology. That VR stuff, always thought it was crazy. But this new one, it sounded like something out of bad a sci-fi movie, you know? He took a sip of water, clearly wanting to break the flow of the conversation, like he had got carried away and said too much. I had agreed to take this case. I believe I can help, I still do, in fact, like a personal mission. Sarah was good at her job, but lacked the empathy for these types of cases. She would probably just tell them to fuck off after not getting results at the pace she expects. Tell me about this trial. What did it entail, and why do you feel it requires our services? Specifically, why did you seek me out? Finding the driving force of why someone would seek out my services is essential to finding out how I can help. It's a method I have used to great success on all my patients. That question is harder to answer than it seems. I'm sure you've seen all this VR stuff, right? All those games and whatnot. I prompted the question again, why he came to me, but he seemed reluctant to answer the question, or maybe he didn't quite grasp the situation. It always goes over their heads, but they get there in the end, sooner or later. I was doing a trial, to test out some new VR technology. They called it The Matrix, a callback to that movie, of course. Assholes. His tone shifted from one of panic, to hate. It offended me that he would have such a negative reaction to scientific research. Sarah agreed with him, she's always flaky like that. Silly Sarah, at this rate I'll have to give her a timeout. Can't have her sullying my patients, they're mentally unstable as is. Stupid woman. They had me put on the headset, a small crown, almost, but had those sticky cup things on my temples. Did look like something out of a bad sci-fi film. Wait, did I already say that? So you were put into a machine that put you into a simulation, essentially. At least that's what I'm getting, I said, ignoring his question. Self-awareness infuriated me. I opted for avoiding the topic altogether. Yeah. It was like I was put into a simulation. Next thing I know, I'm just living my life. A completely different person. I have a wife, Mary, and 2 kids, Jonathan and Karen. The pride of my life. It felt so real. I had a job, I was a lawyer, I went to work every day, talking to clients, building defenses and representing in court. It was excruciating detail. It felt so real, all of it. How much detail are we talking about? Because to me, that sounds impossible. I'm sure modern computers can simulate a form of our world, but a full copy doesn't seem so realistic. You have no idea the levels they went to make it as lifelike as possible. I had a whole life. I died at 95, surrounded by my children and grandchildren. My wife had passed 6 months prior. I lived a good life, it was beautiful. He said, tearing up. Do you remember leaving? The simulation, that is? I asked, leaning slightly forward in his chair, like he was expecting a specific answer. No, actually. I don't remember much recently. Sometimes I just have these moments where I wake up in a new place, can never remember how I got there. It's frustrating, and scary. How is it possible to have lived a whole life? Can they change the perception of time? I don't know, man. I just know it happened. I came here for help. You're not helping. Why did you come to me? Do you even remember? Yeah, because I need. Shit, I don't remember. What is happening to me? I'm still here? How does it make you feel, that feeling of hopelessness, like you're trapped somewhere, and you don't quite know why? What? Why the fuck would you say that? What kind of therapist are you? A kind one. The kind that will help you in your new life. This wasn't the first, and it won't be the last. But being self-aware. Tut, we can't have that now. It would ruin the test results. Surely you agree? He was far gone by this point. The smallest deviation ruins the entire run. Pulling the plug is easier at this point. Useless prick. Edgar, you've crossed the fucking line. This is borderline torture. We shouldn't go through with this. Sarah ripped his headset off, shaking, taking out a cigarette. The man knows he's in a simulation. It's been 6 months. We need to take him out. We can't do this forever. She glanced over at the vacant husk of a man lying there, eyes staring off into space, not quite where they should be. His skin was graying, hair was long, ungroomed. Fingernails were kept short. It was important that if he wakes up, we are prepared for some retaliation. Such is the woes of science. It's okay, he won't remember where he is. We can do it all over again. He will never know. Also, never take my headset off mid-simulation. You wouldn't want me to put you under for another 200 years again? With nothing. No space to move? Nowhere to go? Alone? In fact, I think I will. Maybe you can join Darren there, and tell him yourself what you think. The fear in Sarah's eyes proved the reality of the threat. You were always the compassionate one, weren't you, Edgar? I slowly took off the headset, my eyes readjusting to the world around me. Compassion? I glanced at her body, its vegetative state made me shiver. No, Sarah. Mercy. Story 16, I had to pull over my car. This isn't a story I'd like to be telling, but it has been at the back of my mind for months now and I truly wonder would have I survived. I don't live the most exciting life on earth, I work a 9-to-5 job. I live in a condo apartment building and I have a girlfriend. It was about 2.5 months ago when my girlfriend and I were going on a snack run because she and I are children at heart. And both love Oreos. So we headed out to the nearest Walmart, which was about a 10-minute drive, but the road we take is surrounded by hills and trees, so it's not as busy as the main road, but we take it to save time. This part isn't that important, but we came out with a lot of food. The sun was setting, so we wanted to get home quickly, so we took the quiet road, but it was so much darker due to the trees over the road. It was a beautiful scene until we heard a snap and a loud sound from the back of our car. So I pulled over and slowly mumbled swears to myself as I was hoping it was nothing bad. But as I expected, my tire popped. Fuck. I called my brother to come to pick me up because I'm not the most experienced person with fixing cars. I'm a skinny person with no muscle. He picked up within 4 rings and I told him to come to help me. He told me he's going to be a while, so I went back in my car and started blasting music and head bobbing, trying to make my girlfriend laugh. This went on for about 5 to 10 minutes when my girlfriend started joining in on the fun, when I started to hear small ticks coming from the trunk. So being the man I am, I go see what's making the noise and look again at the flat tire and noticing something. Before I had the chance to walk up to the tire and see what it was, the sounds of twigs breaking and bushes moving pierced through the sound of nature. It's just an animal trying to keep my calm. I wish it was an animal, but when I turned around there was a pale white male, looked in his mid-30s, just stumbling up to me, saying my name. He just said my name over and over, saying, "You're next to you fucking asshole." I could feel my heart retract into my chest. I got back in the car and locked the doors, hoping he'd leave, and my girlfriend is shaking me, asking if I know him. I look at her and shake my head, my body shaking as I pick up my phone and call my brother as my girlfriend calls the police. I hear yelling and something scraping on my car. My brother picks up, "Why, oh, you got to get here, there's a fucking psycho." My brother's car pulls up and knocks on my girlfriend's window. She screamed, thinking it was the guy that somehow knew my name. I got out of the car and ran over to my brother, explain what the fuck just happened, and he looks at me with confusion as he looks for the flat tire. He laughs and picks up what looks to be a small wooden stick with nails going through on each side. He hands it to me and I help him change my tire quickly so I can fucking go home and forget this ever happened. I walk to the back seat on the driver's side to put the piece of wood there, but there are scratch marks spelling out next with random digits, say 64P066. I sigh, fuck, that's going to dent my wallet to get fixed. It was a quiet ride home, but I helped my girlfriend bring all the food inside, checking our backs, scared that he'll appear again. This is one of the things that scared me the most when I went to get the wooden stick with the nails. It was completely stained with blood. And it wasn't my blood or my girlfriend's. And I doubt it was the blood of the guy that we seen on the road. Story 17, never approach a tree that looks unusual, because it might just not be a tree. Have you ever shone a torch into the leaves of some trees at night, and seen how the leaves and branches seem unnatural, as if the pitch black that surrounded you seemed to be persistent to reach that area, and the light seemed to be shying away from the area, as if the green from the leaves was lost, and replaced with an eerie grey? I'm writing to tell you that if your torch is shone up a tree, or if you touch or trip over a tree that looks different, even by accident or passively, even for a single second, you need to run as fast as you can, as quietly as you can, out of the area, and once you have, as soon as you have, you must do your absolute best to not tell anyone what you saw while your torch was shining on that tree, not think about what you saw while it was shining on that tree. I say this because what you saw, that was no tree. Now, not every tree is like this, not every tree will be dangerous, but even if you do not see any of these signs, you still must get out of wherever you are. I cannot stress this enough, because what awaits you if you stay, is far worse than death. After this event, if you have the misfortune of even shining your torch or waking one of these things, and still by some miracle survive, if anything at all in your home or outside your home has been moved, or seems different in any way at all, like the light itself seems to be shying away around it, or you feel that something is watching while the light touches that object, you need to either kill yourself, or if you believe you can get away, by all means try to. But if you want my honest opinion once again, death is paradise compared to what will happen if it gets you. I will recount what happened to me once, when I was clueless, and hopefully I can help you recognize some of the signs. I had a family then, and we were happy. I loved my parents, and they loved me. One day, soon after my 17th birthday, my father told me that it was time to go for my annual camping trip, which was my idea, and that I could take a friend. I had decided to take Kate, who wasn't my girlfriend, but was a close childhood friend, who loved the outdoors and lived close by. So, in a few days, we were hiking through towards the woods. We had decided to set up camp by a massive oak tree, and soon we were toasting marshmallows and exchanging horror stories happily. It was only when we lay down in our tents that my drowsiness began to take over and I slept soundly, only to wake again in the middle of the night with a sudden urge to pee. I got out of the tent, and shone my torch around through the woods, looking for a tree I could use, and my eyes rested on the large oak near our tents. It was only when I'd rested my hand on it that I noticed something strange. The bark. It felt like skin. I ran my hand across the tree in confusion, and shrieked when I felt something. A pulse, not like a human pulse, not like an animal's pulse, but a pulse that felt disgusting, like a bag filled with blood that was full to bursting. I ran, not thinking about Kate in her tent. I feel guilty about not thinking about her and just running away, but now I know that there was no way she could have gotten away. As I reached my house, opened the door and tore up the stairs to my room, I looked back at the woods through the blinds, and saw a dark, humanoid shape but about twice the size of a person walking heavily, but not making any noises with its massive feet as if it weighed nothing. Then I saw its face, as a line of moonlight hit it. It had a deer head, complete with antlers and fur, but what really got me writhing in terror, were its eyes. Instead of bead-shaped, or wide and black like a deer, they were deep in its face, and human-looking. And the most horrifying part, was that they were facing directly forward in its skull, with a line of red tracing from where they should have been to where they were facing forward. A day after that I left home, after seeing another tree planted in the middle of the town square where I lived, and I could have sworn, as I was walking to my car to leave, that a black shape was stomping soundlessly towards the woods. Story 18, The Sargasso Sea. Logbook property of Dr. Stephen Sampson. If found, return to Royal Institute of Marine and Oceanic Sciences. To whomever finds this book, heed the tale within. Let my hubris be a warning to those who may follow in my wake. Log entry, July 22nd. Today, I finally found a boat that will take me to where I want to go. They are a little expensive, but that is the least of my concerns. It is a large ship, with enough storage for all my equipment along with stores of food and water that will last for many months. I do not expect to be gone for more than 4 months, so I will have very little to worry about. Log entry, July 23rd. Sargassum, it's everywhere in the waters offshore. But where does it come from? How does it get here? There are rumors, legends and myths that try to explain. Almost all of them say those that searched never returned. I care little for foolish superstition. I have spent decades dedicated to research, hundreds of thousands of dollars spent looking and funding expeditions. My work was scoffed at, my funds slowly diminished, but I don't care. I must know where the Sargassum comes from, and what secrets it hides. Log entry, July 24th. The coordinates I gave the crew are 34 degrees 1825.7184 N and 66 degrees 16 feet 10 inches .3116 W. Like many other crews, they were reluctant to go, but took the job all the same. The instruments and equipment I brought with me gave some of the crew confused expressions, while others scoffed at me. The captain met with me, to give me some rules and to show me around. His name Michel, an older man whose salt-encrusted beard and hair reminded me more of a stereotype than anything else. It was a skeleton crew of no more than 5 men, including the captain. There was the cook, Jeff, a first mate named Stephen, and 2 miscellaneous crew named Sean and David. Log entry, July 25th. Sean and David are not the brightest of men, but they are easy enough to get along with. I asked them if they know anything about the place we are going, and they suddenly grew quiet and somber. Sean was first to speak. We knows it's a bad place to goes, but we ain't scared. My papa used to tell me that ships would go missing round that place, and they'd see strange lights or hear a pretty lady singing. David was next to speak. Yeah, and sometimes a big old sea monster shows up and gobbles up the crew, ship and all. We supposed to throw big barrels of fish to appease the kraken so it don't sink our ship. I thanked them for telling me about their superstitions, which they didn't understand the meaning of, and left. Log entry, July 26th. I woke up to a flurry of activity going about above deck. Upon arriving on deck, I asked the captain what was going on. With a gruff sigh he said, "See that sunrise? Red is crimson. Been a while since I've seen it that shade of red. Let's hope you aren't a Jonah, Mr. Science Man." I had no idea what he was rambling on about, but I decided to retire back below deck to finish up some work. A few hours later the ship began to rock heavily. Luckily I do not suffer from seasickness, or else I would have been very miserable. Sean arrived back to my room, soaked through. He told me that we encountered a bad storm, and blamed it on David, who had been whistling to himself as he worked. I don't believe in such foolish things, but I will admit that the clouds that morning had not shown any sign of a storm of this magnitude on the way. It lasted well into the night, and due to the state of the boat, I was unable to get any work done. I hope that this trip doesn't get much more hectic than this. Story 19, Diary of a Dead Girl. I want to start off by saying that what you're about to read you probably won't believe. And that's fine. Really. I don't know if I'd believe it either if I were you. But it's the truth. I've been in my new house for less than 1 month. It took me a while to unpack and get organized, and I'll admit that I put some of it off. I did my best though, and just hadn't gotten the chance to clean out the attic until recently. In California, where I live, attics aren't normally used for storage like you see in movies. Most of us don't have attics full of old family heirlooms, including a dusty old trunk full of vintage clothes. I hate to tell you, but here in California, attics are used to collect nothing more than dust and mice. So I was more than surprised when I found a diary up there. It sounds so cliché. I only went up there to put down my straps as a precaution. As soon as I lifted the hatch, I saw it. A white diary with a keyless lock. It took me only a few minutes to break it open, don't judge me. I kind of wish I hadn't though. Even though I'm actively writing my stories that I post on Wattpad, at L_wrote_it, I think this diary needs to be shared. For a horror lover like myself, it's just too good not to share. Plus, I could use some opinions and thoughts on it, in all honesty. I really don't know what to do. The pages that follow are excerpts from the diary. I haven't read it all the way through yet, not even close. Between settling into the house, working full-time, writing, etc., I barely have any free time as it is. But this diary has started to claim the few moments of free time I do have. Let me tell you. The more I read, the more in fear I become that this diary is real. If it's not, why go through all the trouble writing it and then hiding it where no one would normally find it? Anyway, I don't care if you believe me or not. I found this strange diary and I intend to read it to the end and figure out if this is real, fake, and most importantly, if there is really a girl out there somewhere who's in serious danger. You'll see why I think that as soon as you start to read it. Please let me know what you guys think. I'll continue to post pages as much as I can. Comment your thoughts and feel free to ask questions. Maybe together we can solve this. Either way, I need your help. I need to know what happened to this girl if this is, in fact, the diary of a dead girl. Diary. Dear diary. Well, I guess I should introduce myself, huh? My name is Jenna, but you can call me Jinx, everyone else does. I'm 17 and completely ordinary in every way, other than the fact that I am totally jinxed. I'm not exaggerating, okay? I'm cursed, doomed, or hexed. I have been jinxed for the past year and I don't know how to stop it. My best friend Cash is the one who came up with my nickname after he witnessed firsthand how my luck took a turn for the worst. And now everyone calls me Jinx. I actually kinda like it. Anyway, at first, he only agreed to help me because he thought I was either lying or completely crazy. But then he realized that I was neither. I was telling the truth. Now he and I set out to try to break this curse of mine. Whether we run into ghosts, monsters, demons, and everything evil that you can imagine, Cash and I have promised to stick together. I'm glad I don't have to go through this alone anymore. When this first started, I decided to start documenting everything by writing it down in a journal. I like writing and have always written stories and stuff, so I figure this is a good way to practice writing, if nothing else. The pages are a bit out of order, but that's okay. I figure if anything ever happens to me, someone will read this and know what happened. Until then, this journal is kept hidden safely in the attic. My parents don't even know. They would think I was crazy if I told them. Wait. Important, I guess if you're reading this then that means something has happened to me. To the person WHO finds this, hopefully you can figure out what happened to me and if I need help. I'm probably dead, but please don't give up until you know that for sure. Please call my best friend Cash, 310 776 4x. Sorry guys, had to block out some of the numbers. If you can't find him, then he's probably with me. Please help us if you can. If we're gone, it's for a very, very bad reason. Love. Jinx. / Dear Diary. My hands are still shaking so much. They were worse earlier. It was so hard to keep them steady. I drew in a deep, cool breath and released it into the night air, aimed my gun, and pulled the trigger. The shot rang through my ears and I flinched backwards. He dropped to the ground, his body now slumped on the wet asphalt. Did I kill him? You probably think I'm a murderer. What else do you call it when you shoot someone and they die? Maybe you're right. I'm not even sure anymore. I used to tell myself it was self-defense. I'm never able to get used to staying home alone. I mean, one night wouldn't be a big deal. But 3 weeks. It was a lot longer than I first thought. My parents are on vacation, leaving me home alone for the first time. I'm old enough and can definitely take care of myself, so it wasn't a big deal. I'm a responsible girl. The first few nights I had parties and sleepovers with a few girls from my chemistry class. But after that, the excitement of not having my parents around wore off. Plus, my house was a mess. I grew tired of all the constant cleaning. I'm kind of a neat freak. The pizza delivery guy had memorized my order, too. I craved a home-cooked meal and some peace and quiet. Ugh, I'm such an old lady, right? Tonight, I made dinner and then decided to take a shower before changing into my PJs and watching a movie. My bathroom mirror started to fog up with steam as I undressed. The hot water of the shower ran over me and I closed my eyes as it drenched my long hair down my back. But right as I opened my eyes, I could swear there was someone standing in front of me. I screamed and almost slipped from jumping in fright. My heart was pounding. No one was there. Figuring my eyes were playing tricks on me, I poured shampoo into my palm and lathered it on top of my head. Leaning my head back, I rinsed the suds out. Next was conditioner, so I opened my eyes again. This time I was certain I saw someone. A tall, gawky man stood in front of my face. He was dressed in all black, with a black knit cap on his head. And his face, I don't know how to describe it. His eyes were like black holes. His nose was crooked and swollen, the tip red as blood. I'll never forget his mouth either. Pale, chapped and cracked lips that parted to reveal his jagged teeth. I expected him to snarl. It was horrifying. I jumped back against the shower screaming. He was gone. My body trembled as I shut the water off, grabbed my towel and ran. I locked my bedroom door and got dressed. I was shaking. The bathroom had been so quiet. I hadn't heard anyone come in or out. Even with the water running, I could still hear if someone else had been in there with me. At least, I thought I could. I know I saw him. I know I did. It sounds crazy, but it's the truth. A terrifying monster of a man stood inches from me when I opened my eyes in the shower. Then, in a flash, he was gone. Minutes later, he had returned. And like the first time, he disappeared within seconds. I sat on the edge of my bed and shook my head in confusion. I'm too scared to close my eyes in the shower ever again. I don't know how I'm going to wash my hair. I'm too embarrassed to call my parents. Plus, I don't want to ruin their vacation. They'd never leave me home alone again. So, I convinced myself that it was all in my head. I struggled to fall asleep, tossing and turning in my bed. Just as I was dozing off, my room got really cold. Like freezing. I could feel the cold air fill my lungs when I breathed. And then I felt a warmth on my face. It was really quick, but I felt it. I opened my eyes and there he was again. The scary man that I know I saw in the shower earlier. His face was suspended above mine. When I looked into his eyes, it was like looking into dark holes in the ground. It reminded me of dug-up graves. I could feel his breath on my face, hitting my nose and cheeks. I screamed and tried to get up, but a force of some kind was holding me down. He smiled and his lips cracked and started bleeding. I was so scared that I couldn't even cry. I just squeezed my eyes shut and waited. And then, nothing. He was gone. I turned on every light in the house and then ran back to my bed. I decided to sleep in my parents' room. My dad has a gun that he keeps in their closet, so I got it and placed it under the pillow. I've gone shooting with my dad a few times for target practice, but I wish I had taken it more seriously and learned how to really shoot. Still, even if my aim is bad, I was hoping the sight of the gun would be enough to scare this creep off. I barely slept. Between fearing the man would come back and having all the lights on, I just laid in bed and stared at the ceiling. Finally, I decided to get up and watch TV. Then I called my best friend, Cash, and begged him to come over. He laughed at me and said I was scared of being home alone, but I told him that wasn't it. He said he'd come over later that night since he was busy all day. I went out and stayed out all day. Can you blame me? When I finally got back home, I was on high alert, but the house was quiet. I stayed in my parents' room, waiting for Cash to come over. He texted and said he was on his way, much to my relief. As I waited, I used my parents' bathroom and tried to rinse out my hair. I wasn't ready to take another shower just yet, even though I know how gross that sounds. The water must have been a lot hotter than I thought it would be because their mirror filled up with steam pretty fast. I rinsed my hair quickly and grabbed my hair towel. As I stood up straight, I stared at their mirror. Someone had taken their finger and written on the steamed-up mirror. It said, "I'm watching you." I called out for Cash, but no one answered. I ran and got my dad's gun and aimed it at the bathroom. No one came out. I jumped when I heard a knock on our back door, even though that's how Cash comes over all the time. I was so relieved to think he was over that I made a mad dash for the door. Maybe I was going too fast, but I unlocked it and threw it open, expecting to see him there. Instead, I was just staring into our yard. It was a little foggy, but not as bad as it gets usually. Our property extends pretty far back. That's the reason my parents bought this house. They said they loved the privacy and the quiet of not having any neighbors close by. I really hate them for that right now. I would love to have a neighbor next door. I still had the gun and aimed it into the fog. I wasn't about to shoot though. I didn't want to shoot Cash or an animal or anything. I called out for him and was answered by crickets. This was probably dumb, but I took a step outside after turning on the outside light. If it wasn't so foggy, I could have seen clearly. I could have sworn I heard a moaning sound, like someone was hurt. What if that scary man hurt Cash? I know you're saying call the police. And that's great if you live anywhere near a police station. But we don't. We're out in the middle of nowhere. It would take the cops forever and a day to get here, and Cash could be dead by then. At least if I could get to him first. It wasn't Cash. The fog grew really thick and I heard the moaning again. It was definitely a person. I couldn't see anyone or anything. I had to go back inside, but I couldn't. As I turned to run back into the house, the man was standing behind me. My entire body was trembling. I know he was going to grab me and drag me away. I could feel it. It was like I could tell exactly what he was thinking. I spun around and ran as fast as I could. The man came after me. I could hear his heavy footsteps in our grass. I hadn't been that far out on our property before. He was getting closer. I knew if he got me, I'd be gone forever and no one would ever know what happened to me. So, I turned around and as he came at me, I pulled the trigger. The sound of the shot was much stronger and louder than I anticipated. My ears were ringing. But I got him. Even with my poor aim, I hit him and he dropped to the ground. Cash heard the shot and came running. He was freaked out, as was I. I tried to explain what happened, but my story barely made any sense. He kept asking me, "Who did you shoot?" And all I could do was say, "The scary man," and point to where he had fallen. Cash told me to stay where I was and went to go look. I tried to protest, but I was in shock, I think. When Cash went to find the man, he wasn't there. He was gone. Cash thought I had lost my mind. But I know what I saw. I know I'm not crazy. Jinx. Story 20, Am I Going Crazy? Hi, so sorry if this is all a bit jumbled. I will do my best to make sure this story makes sense. My memories of this night are still faded and come to me in waves. I'm still trying to puzzle the pieces back together again. Here it goes. I have been with my boyfriend for a few months now. It was going great actually. We would spend our weekends getting high and watching low-budget zombie movies on his 22-inch TV. His house was always cold. I always got a cold shiver whenever I walked into that house. In every room I could feel eyes burning into the back of my head. I was never alone. I had spoken to my boyfriend about this several times, but he would always laugh it off. I hated to go to the bathroom. It was cold and dark and the light never worked. The attic was right above the door. It was never shut. My boyfriend had told me that the ladder was never probably fixed to the wall, so you could never close the attic door. It horrified me. In the dark I swear I could see eyes in all corners of the small opening staring at me. I dared to turn my back on it. As time went by I started to notice the odd occurrences that would happen in that house, things going missing, objects moved where nobody had been, the taps would turn on in the middle of the night with no explanation. The bathtub filled up one night, but there was no plug to hold the water in. I dug at the plug to see what could be trapping the water. A thick clump of long black matted hair was pulled from inches into the bath. As the water rushed down the hole, something pushed me down into the bath. I banged my head of the wall. I turned myself round to see who was there, but through the dizziness of my mind and my wet hair tangled over my eyes, what I saw I can only describe as a black figure crawling up and into the attic. I was woken to my boyfriend lifting me out of the bath. He just got home from work. He asked what had happened. I tried to explain, but no words would come out, just mismatched jumbled words. Nothing too out of the ordinary happened after that. Things would still go missing and black fingerprints would be found on the walls in the bathroom, but nobody ever batted an eyelid. I would awake during the night to see this tall black figure leaning over my bed with the biggest smile I had ever seen. Then the mouth would open to 6 feet long and inside was razor-sharp jagged teeth with rotten flesh in between. Every time I would scream, but nothing would come out, just a small high-pitched whine. Then nothing, complete blackness would take over my body. This would happen once a week at first, then slowly they became more and more frequent. The horror would never subside, instead it would get more and more intense as the nights went by. Then that night happened. I awoke at 3 a.m. I stumbled up to my feet and walked down the long old hallway to the bathroom. I did what I needed to do and got out of there. But this time I didn't feel anything staring at me from the attic, but rather I felt it was around me, sucking the very air out of me and strangling my chances of life. I was stuck. I couldn't move. My feet felt glued to the floor. As I struggled, I looked up to see those same black fingerprints all over the walls leading down into the bedroom me and my boyfriend shared. I tried to scream, but again nothing more than just a high-pitched whine would approach my lips. I looked down to my feet, struggling to move them, but stood right in front of my own pink feet was pitch black feet. I don't know what they were too big to be human. The nails on each toe was long and thick, they pointed up into a tight curl. I lifted my head to see the wide mouth staring back at me. The smell of rotten flesh consumed me and it all goes black. I awoke in darkness. I stumbled around trying to find a light switch, a torch, anything. I reached my hands out and grabbed a string dangling from the ceiling, and click, I saw on my hands thick red blood. It covered up to my neck. It wasn't old, but it wasn't new, just the stages of starting to harden and crust off. I looked up and in front of me was my boyfriend. He was standing in front of that thing. "Run," I said, but he just smiled at me. He tilted his head to the left and said, "I have no reason to run." He brought his hand up from behind his back. He had a knife. I stared at him, wondering what he is going to do. Was it me he wanted to hurt? Why? He slowly started inching towards me, slashing the knife left to right, the smile never leaving his face. He said, "Come on, Kimmy, I just want a taste." I screamed, only this time it actually come from my throat and out my mouth. He was in front of me as he swung the knife left to right. I put my arms up in defense. He cut into me time and time again. There was nowhere for me to run, nothing for me to do except stand here and take it. I dropped to the floor, ready to give up on my life. But I fell through what I thought was floor and onto the top of the stairs. I looked up. I was in the attic. I jumped to my feet and ran as fast as I could down the stairs and out the door into the streets. I stopped halfway down the road to notice the blood was gone. The cuts on my arms were gone. I looked back at where I just ran from and nothing, no house, just construction workers and big diggers. I didn't go to the police. What would I tell them? That my boyfriend attacked me? But I have no injuries. The house is gone, he was gone. What happened to me? I don't know. Nothing makes sense to me. What do I do? Did this even happen? Should I admit myself now?